The panels that were film and financing and distribution related were almost all doom and gloom.
Mm.
The industry is in the dumps. We're not getting any money. We're not getting any distribution. I went to a couple of creator and brand panels, and they're like, business is booming. I know these guys will not want to associate themselves with creators with the word content. And the creators, they really don't know how to make films, nor do many of them want to.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I'm joined by Sam Widows, an entertainment attorney and producer who specializes in helping creators navigate the intersection of creative strategy, financing, and distribution. Sam writes the Substack Widows Speak and was producer on the Emmy-nominated documentary series As We Speak. He's here to discuss how the legal and business frameworks are evolving as creators increasingly bypass traditional Hollywood gatekeepers, and tell us a little bit about his own creative journey on the stuff that he's working on. Sam, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, John. It's awesome to be with you. I know I guess, fairly newcomers to the Substack universe, but enjoying just connecting with all the folks, especially who are coming from more of a traditional entertainment world and trying to really explore and understand where the creator world can help grow what we're making.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you because you have a unique perspective on this space and how it's growing and evolving, coming from the legal representation side of things. But you're at a really interesting intersection of legal and creative. I think that very often people who come from that legal background are really, really good storytellers just because that's how you have to think. Can you talk a little bit about what that intersection looks like for you in your career?
Yeah, so right now, the majority of my time is spent with my legal clients. I work with mostly independent filmmakers, a lot of probably more documentary than narrative, but altogether it's filmmakers, production companies who are raising money and then getting into production and then finding distribution, going to film festivals and so I get to work with filmmakers along that whole journey and look at how they want to build not just the story they're telling, but how does that fit into a larger strategy. And I think, as you know, as we've seen over the last several years, the mindset of I'm going to make a great film, get it into a top tier film festival and get a global rights deal, that may have been a more feasible path 5 years ago, but it's really not these days. And it's fun to be able to advise clients as early as possible and to work with them as more of a strategic partner and creative partner and legal partner along that journey so that they can start thinking and encouraging them to start thinking about the different opportunities they might have along with a streaming deal, but then also the different opportunities that are starting to arise in terms of different ways to exploit their story even before it becomes a feature, and understanding what other elements might attract audiences and maybe even ways to release bits and pieces of it before and start trying to build and find that audience on different platforms. I've sort of encouraged my clients to do that, but at the same time, through communities like the one on Substack, and then and also just at different events and different film festivals, really trying to understand what are the use cases, what are the success cases of other films that have been able to go direct to audience, build relationships with brand partners, independent distributors, just all the various ways that more entrepreneurial producers and filmmakers are starting to think about the way that they tell stories.
That's great. I have a friend who I spoke with yesterday who's producing, self-financing and producing a horror feature film. And I have been thinking a lot since talking with this person about the kind of distribution pipeline and having a market in mind and having an audience in mind. Can you give some pointers to someone who's never really kind of gone through that process of distribution for a feature before and strategies to implement as soon as possible?
Yeah, so I'll say at the top, I've never worked in horror
Sure.
in the genre space, as they
Yeah.
say, but I kind of wish I had because it seems to be the one space that always has an audience, you can make the film. It's the Blumhouse model, right? He was making films for nothing, and they were getting enormous returns because people love that genre. So that specific audience, I'm not familiar with it, but I know it exists.
Yeah.
And so I would just encourage them first to say, get to know what that audience looks like, understand how the most successful horror films have performed, where they performed, and some of let's just look at the marketing and distribution tactics that those films have used. The other things have been little tidbits I picked up from different conversations, whether it's Evan Shapiro, a couple of filmmakers who independently worked with the Fithian group to independently distribute their narrative film theatrically, and the way that they just cold called a bunch of brands and said, hey, we have this movie it's a romantic comedy, but it takes place in Mexico, whether it was sex forward brands or hotels, funny companies that wanted to partner. And when it came time for distribution, they were partnering for free giveaways to get audiences in seats. Anyway, that's one funny example, but the one other example I would say about understanding your story and maybe getting it out early was the notion of creating an online presence for your character or for your story before it exists in feature-length form, right? If you have a film about a character, start a TikTok for that character. Yeah. And if you have an actor, if you're the writer, whatever, just like start putting that story out there and seeing how audiences respond. Build on that and see if you can generate enough interest and say, you like this character, I've got a screenplay, eventually say I've got a screenplay ready to go, and start crowdfunding and start sort of understanding, if it's about an issue or it's about a particular genre. Maybe there again are brands or production companies that specialize, or studios that specialize in that sort of sector. But I think the notion of sort of like getting your story out there, even in little bits, it doesn't give away the whole film. It just starts giving a taste to the world of what storytelling might be to come.
Awesome. I think that's very valuable, even if you don't have that experience in the horror world. I think it's universal and applicable across genres. So you were a producer on As We Speak, an Emmy-nominated feature film. I mean, this is relatively recent development. This Emmy nomination happened mere weeks ago, really. Can you talk about your role on the feature and what that experience was like, both producing it and receiving the Emmy nomination?
Yeah. It's been, it's a process that started 8 years ago now. In 2016 was when I first read about the issue that became a book that became the documentary. And the documentary concerns the use of rap lyrics as evidence in criminal trials, which on its face is sort of and specifically how it's used is someone's on trial for a crime. Prosecution, during the course of their investigation, finds that person put out a song on YouTube or Instagram or had some rhymes written in a notebook that may or may not have anything to do with the crime in question, but is still entered into evidence either as a confession. See, this guy rapped about selling drugs and he's on trial for selling drugs, therefore he must have sold drugs, or as character evidence, right? To establish motive or intent. This person raps about selling drugs, therefore, and he's on trial for selling drugs, therefore he had the motive to sell the drugs. In either instance, it's not just absurd that art is used as evidence of, is used as truth, but it also is wrapped up in just flagrant racism, stereotypes, underlying implicit biases. And prosecutors know this, and they've used it in hundreds of cases over the years. And so when I first read about the issue, I realized there is a theatrical element to a courtroom, and it's the reason why legal dramas, do so well over and over and over again, because there's just inherent drama when someone is on trial for their life, and 12 strangers are just hearing a story. And the best trial attorneys are really good actors. They know the law, but they also know how to convey a message. They know how to perform in a way that's really persuasive. I knew there was that drama, but before that, I knew, being I guess, a hip hop fan, and as someone who grew up in the LA suburbs, like my interaction with the Black community was almost entirely through hip hop. I learned so much, not literally, but figuratively, right? Through the music, I was exposed to an experience, a broad experience, and never took any of the words literally. And so to think that those words were being used and presented literally in a court of law was not just an outrage, but I was like, oh, this is an opportunity to talk about what is hip hop, what is the Black experience in America, what is the interaction between the LAPD and the communities of South Central Los Angeles. Like all of these things were within the scope of what became a book called Rap on Trial was, right? It was, so you could just tell this wide ranging story in the context of this sort of dramatic legal microcosm. And because there were 700 known cases of this taking place, I was like, oh, we're going to have a wealth of storytelling possibilities here. And yeah, we went through a series of versions of what the story might be. We thought of adapting it as a scripted limited series where you sort of take one season and dive into a case, and maybe the case is actually an amalgam of 5 to 10 different cases and the facts of different artists who've been on trial over the years. That got pit. I've started a series on my Substack that's just sort of going year by year, all the process of developing and pitching this project and all the different ways that you think, okay, this is going to work. We got a really good pitch with Kerry Washington's company, and she's in tears hearing the pitch and says she wants to do it. And then 6 months later, her team is like, we're just too busy. We can't do this now. And then you're back to square one. You're like, okay, what's next? And we have this active trial in Los Angeles, and we're in with the defense attorney and the experts and all these people. And you're there the day that he gets out of jail, and then he says, I don't want to do it unless I'm getting paid 25 grand. And you're like, oh, okay, well, we're not doing that either. So we're going back to square one, right? And it's this process of like, at what point do you give up on a project? At what point do you say, no, we're making this no matter what?
I've been following the series that you've been writing on your Substack, and it's been really entertaining and interesting. And you talk about all the fits and starts and what it was like to like go back to the owners of the IP and say, like, just give us a little bit more time to hold on to option this IP. Like, at what point, I'm sure that you mentioned, I think, that you started to feel like you were trying their patience with it. At what point do you say, like, this is enough, or no, this is a story worth telling? Stubbornly straight ahead, or do you kind of analyze things and determine, okay, maybe this is a sign?
The universe had some masochistic plan for us where just as we were about to give it all up, something would happen, right? Just enough to keep you hooked, where you said, no, this is going to happen, whether it was just as one of the shopping periods for the rights was going to expire, like we have some really great meeting where some production company or studio or some part of the story starts to come alive, and you realize, like, oh my gosh, like this is the thing that's going to make it sell. And again, like there were just enough of those at just the right time that allowed, and granted, I'll say, like, there's a dozen times during the course of that 7 years that certainly my then fiance and now wife would have been like, give this up and move on to the next project. And somehow it kept happening that we've moved it forward inch by inch, came back, and then moved it forward, a foot. And then the director says yes. And it's a guy who's like literally the perfect person to tell the story. And then, 6 months later, and that'll be what I write about next, because it's like, when that happened, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is the person who has the vision, the clarity of storytelling to both tell a musical story, to tell a historical story, to tell a criminal justice story, and the artistic capability to do something that even, having thought about this for 5 years at that point, like my mind couldn't have even comprehend. And so that's where I realized like my skill and my job as a producer, like I'm not that artist. I know I can sort of put the pieces together of a story. I can work my tail off to find the sources and sort of structure it the right way. But once you get a director who's got a vision and the talent to like bring it to life, I still get chills when I like, sit behind a monitor. I'm like, oh my gosh, it looks so much cooler than I ever thought it could.
Can I ask about financing? Can I ask about how you raise the money to do the things you need to do to get this produced?
For the first several years, it was just, we were only pitching to the entities or the production companies that sold to streaming entities, right? Like we were sort of in that ecosystem of the agencies that were like, this is how you do it. Independent financing was not really my skill set, and also wasn't on my radar. We were sort of being told, get it to big name producer who sells to Netflix or Amazon or whatever. And we took all those meetings. They were generally positive, but it didn't result in a yes. About the time that I finished, and other things lined up where it was like, we finished our first documentary for Quibi, and the series premiered right after the launch of Quibi and was drowned out by the soon demise of Quibi and the fact that it was the middle of a pandemic and all these things. But like, had that not happened, the reviews we got for that series were spectacular. And so it's like everything that was planned on, using that premiere as the launch for this next project was squandered. So it was one of those like, best laid plans. In hindsight, and in 2025, understanding like all the avenues that we really did have at our disposal that we weren't really thinking about, I would have, started with a podcast, or I would have started with some short form interviews, getting sort of the word out and owning the IP, trying to build the audience. And then also going to independent financiers, going to people in the world of criminal justice reform, of social justice, of hip hop advocacy, and saying, hey, we put in this amount of money, that amount of money, this is where we're going, this is the plan, all that stuff. 2021 was when we really started to pursue independent financing. And we had one company that was interested and basically strung us along for about 11 months, up until the point that our director signed on, a studio came on and was like, we were ready to take this to the next level. The studio then was the one that facilitated a pitch to Paramount Plus, and Paramount ended up acquiring, commissioning the whole film. So it wasn't until literally went into production that we got any money in the door, but that money was the full budget to actually make the film. So had we gone for independent financing much earlier on, maybe it would have come in chunks of $50,000 to $100,000 along the way, and we would have been able to start making it. But it just so happened that we ultimately pitched it, and the buyer was the streamer that said, great, we'll pay for the whole thing. Here's your budget, deliver this in 10 months. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh crap, we got to get this whole thing done like that.
And when you went to produce this thing and you knew you had this kind of clock on it, how did that impact the actual production of it? How did that impact your role, and how, I guess, how did it impact the project as a whole?
Yeah, production was the studio had a outrageously fast delivery timeline. They greenlit it in February and said delivered by October. And so I think actually, because we had done 6 years of development at that point, like we knew exactly who we needed to interview, where they were located. The director and I had at that point been working on his version of what the film would be for a year and a half. So the outline was more than just an outline. It was like, this is who we're interviewing in these places to go with this timeline, and these are the cases that we're going to look at. And we had shoots in Atlanta, LA, Chicago, Houston, New York, and London. And it was all, I think, on like a 2.5 month schedule. But post production started like a month into production. So we had editors working while footage was coming in. And because the director, this guy Jason Harper, who's just incredible, he was an editor. That was his background.
Yeah.
So he was shooting the film as he's cutting it in his head almost, right? He knows every scene that he needs. He knows all the coverage he needs, and was feeding that to his editors and saying, this is how I want to build this scene. This is how I want to build that scene, getting all the coverage in each spot. So it was a really amazing, like, precision production process. And I think because we had spent so much time developing it and really working through what ideas worked, what didn't work, what storylines paid off for the ultimate conclusion of the film, we were able to actually execute it on such a expedited timeline.
Wow. I mean, good on you. That's really terrific to hear and encouraging.
It made me encouraging, but it was like not for the faint of heart. I definitely will tell people, like, don't do what I did.
I mean, sometimes you don't have the option. Sometimes it's just it's foisted upon you.
And you have the option. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I will say, like, it wouldn't have been made had we not had so much. Yeah, we had different episodes in terms of redeveloping and reworking the story. It's an interesting thing to develop an idea. Like, it wasn't like the story of one case. It was like the issue of rap music on trial, right? Rap lyrics used as evidence. How do you tell that story? You could do it in a really sort of academic way and just have, because there's plenty of lawyers who spoke on it, and there's plenty of lawyers who had written about it. You could do it in a purely musical way, just interview a bunch of rappers. And you could, and Jason just had this amazing vision of weaving it together through the first person perspective of a rapper whose name is Kemba, a guy who had released a couple albums and had like some notoriety, but certainly wasn't famous, and also isn't, gang affiliated, has no criminal record, criminal in any way, shape, or form, but by virtue of being a black man in America, could at any point be arrested. And at any point during that process, his backlog of his library of songs, some of which reference drugs, some of which reference guns, but all in the context of his own experience of growing up in the Bronx and understanding, like, he's telling stories of his surroundings and the people he grew up with. And so Jason had this brilliant idea of, like, this whole thing is going to be Kemba's journey, going from city to city, talking to artists, talking to attorneys, and trying to figure out, like, is this a thing that could ever impact me? I'm just an artist sharing stories about my experience in the world. This is an issue that clearly only affects other people, but wait a second. At some point, could I get hit with something like this and be faced with being in a defendant's seat where I can't speak for myself because my lawyer is going to tell me not to open my mouth, and I'm going to have to watch as a prosecutor and defense attorney interpret my words against me. Like, that was the sort of meta approach. I was like, shit, that's the best version of what anything we'd come up with in development.
I love that, and I love hearing about the journey and how this thing developed. Real quick before we wrap it up, tell everyone about your Substack. Tell me what you are most interested in gaining from writing the Substack and what the experience has been like as a content creator in that space.
Yeah, so I think the seed of the Substack probably started last year when we premiered As We Speak at Sundance. And the experience of, grateful for Paramount Plus and their financing of the film and releasing it. We turned in a project file. It went on the platform a month after Sundance, and that was it. And I still to this day don't know who watched it, when they watched, where they are. There's no sort of feedback really from Paramount nor from an audience. And it was a project that I just knew would have an audience if it was marketed, if we were given an opportunity to engage with those people. I know Jason and Kemba were eager to do in-person events and just engage with the conversation about what we were talking about and how it would impact artists and filmmakers and writers and anyone in that space, right? So that was sort of the dissatisfaction with a lack of engagement or really understanding of who the audience was that planted the seed of my desire to get that direct audience engagement. Next was last summer, I saw the director of a documentary called Your Fat Friend. She and her producer did a presentation about their self-distribution of their film and the ways in which their audience directly communicated with them after they had premiered at Tribeca and didn't get a sale. Their audience was like, we want to watch the film. How can we do it? How much money can we spend? We want to give you our money. And they started using different platforms like Kinema and Jolt and Gather and understanding like there's more value in the direct to audience connection than just the money that you will receive. You will get personal satisfaction, and you will also get a continuing relationship that you can leverage for your next project. And those filmmakers were like, I'm never going back. This is the way that I'm going to engage from now on. That's how I'm going to start thinking about my projects from the outset, from the development stage. How do I connect directly with an audience early and just keep building that so that they feel like they are invested in me and the story? And then I think last fall, I was still sort of straddling this producer legal world, and the conversations I was having with clients, with executives, with financiers, with everyone, were all sort of swirling in my head with a bunch of different thoughts. And I thought, why don't I just start getting these out into the world? And Substack seemed to be a really great platform, and it has been, and it's been really rewarding to be involved in sort of the film stack world as a non-filmmaker, but like active participant in this conversation that's around, where's independent film and television going, and how I went to Sundance this year just as an observer and went to a handful of different panels. The panels that were film and television, film and financing and distribution related were almost all doom and gloom. The industry is in the dumps. We're not getting any money. We're not getting any distribution. I went to a couple of creator and brand panels, and they're like, business is booming. We're getting all this audience data. We're getting brands that want to participate. We're expanding our reach. We're growing our studios. It's like, okay, something's happening over here that these guys can learn from. I know these guys will not want to associate themselves with creators with the word content. These guys, the creators, they really don't know how to make films, nor do many of them want to, right? Long form filmmaking is a different skill set. Long form television is a different skill set. Creators, the creator community is a wide variety of types of creators, right? There's people who do unboxing videos. There's people who do game shows. There's people who do comedy. There's people who do whatever Jake Paul does. It's like, there's people who do video podcasts.
Yeah.
It's a whole, but what is true of all of the creators is they have a direct relationship with their audience, and they have a direct connection to the feedback that their audience gives them in terms of what is working, what is not. And over time, what that builds more than anything is trust. And a creator knows that if they continue to, feed the things that the audience wants, they might be able to build the trust to go branch out and try new things. Anyway, it's just all these different things that I'm seeing, like, okay, how can the indie film world learn from the creator world? And on the business side, really start thinking about their stories as universes of storytelling, universes of content that can be broken up into different pieces. And if the filmmakers don't want to make the podcast or the short form or the merch or the live event, well, where are the partnerships that we can make, right? Where are the people that want to get involved in that and be part of that storytelling world?
Fantastic.
So that's kind of what I'm writing about, and putting ideas out there and getting to meet great, writers and producers and people in all different walks that a lot of, I think, I want to say but like my followers and the people that I've interacted with are kind of from the traditional film and television space that are engaging with Substack because they want to know more about the creator world, and they want to know more about how can I really think about the way that I want to interact with my audience as I tell my story, tell the story, work with the collaborators that I want to work with, and grow that brand.
To wrap it up, how can people find you and find your work and find both the feature and your Substack?
Yeah, thanks. My Substack is Widow's Peak. My last name, Widow's Peak. Play on that.
We'll put it in the
cool.
show notes or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the film was called As We Speak: Rap Music on Trial. It's on Paramount Plus. There's a handful of other clients that are also doing great work. I'd love to promote them too. It's cool to be able to work on both sides of these projects and be part of a lot of really interesting storytelling.
Amazing. Thank you, Sam, for joining. Everyone stay tuned for the next one. And we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.